I know this is always a very attractive part of the session because patients as well as their physicians want to know what therapies are coming out in use for patients. So it truly is my pleasure to moderate the session and introduce Karen Kozarski from Swan Bio and Martinell. I always mispronounce stuff. Martinell from Minarex and I can't say your last name. Sarah Alspack from Bluebird, and
David Muller.
I can always say David Muller from Paxel. So I've asked each to only provide 2 to 3 slides just to give some grounding. So they're limited to 5 minutes to just give you guys grounding what they're working on, and then we'll really use the time to go through your questions and anyone online, and if that doesn't work, I have my own questions as well.
It's really an honor to be here. I'm Sarah Alspack from Bluebird Bio. I lead communications, also patient advocacy for the organization. This is my first time at ALD Connect, and it's obviously an incredibly exciting time at Bluebird Bio, and I think we are just so excited to be here and really to express our gratitude to everyone in this room and to all of the families and patients and experts and healthcare providers who have been a part of this journey with us. And also, I think really an honor to hear earlier over lunch, having Natalie and the work of Patrick honored, because that's really where it all began for us, and the work that Amber was involved in, and is really sort of the impetus for who we are as a company and where we are today. At Bluebird, we say we're pursuing gene therapies to give patients and their families more Bluebird days. And I think fitting that the theme of this conference is on living your best life with ALD, because to us a Bluebird day is whatever your best life is. It is your perfect day. It is a very individual thing. And that's absolutely what we aspire to do. If you go to the next slide, this is my required disclaimer as a company speaker that I am an employee of Bluebird. I own equity in the company, and I will also say I am not a doctor. I'm not a healthcare professional, and I cannot answer medical questions. But I will give a plug that I know there's a gene therapy panel tomorrow. I know that one of my colleagues is speaking on it, along with a number of other experts who are obviously here and much more equipped to answer your medical questions. Next slide. So this slide just gives you a little bit about who Bluebird is. We are a gene therapy company. We focus on lentiviral vector gene therapies. And we've been doing this for a long time. Our therapies have been studied across several different diseases in more than 180 patients with more than 500 years of patient experience with those therapies. And in particular, I would just highlight that, as I mentioned, our work in ALD has been a part of our journey. It was really the impetus for the founding of Bluebird Bio. And the FDA approval of our gene therapy, Skysona, in September was really very much the completion of a mission for us. If I were not showing you corporate slides right now, I will tell you that what I wish I had on there was the video of 40 members of our team crammed into a conference room for our FDA advisory committee meeting, all standing up and cheering when the FDA voted unanimously. The FDA's advisory committee panel voted unanimously in favor of LA-Cell last June, something that was an incredible amount of effort by so many. Or perhaps the photo of our regulatory team and our colleagues who worked on our FDA application at 11:30 p.m. at night on September 16th, still in the office and holding up the letter when the FDA finally sent it through to us. This is really deeply personal for the company, and to be here and now know that we have a therapy that's approved for boys 4 to 17 with early active CALD is just a tremendous accomplishment. So thank you all. If you go to the next slide. As I said, I can't speak to the medical aspects of our therapy, but what I can tell you is we're now at the point where we are ready for the therapy to be available to patients in a commercial setting. So that means aligned with our approved FDA label, we are working very hard for commercial availability before the end of this year. It does take a couple of months after getting FDA approval to just get manufacturing up and running to ensure everything's aligned with specifications according to the final label. And that our therapy will be available through qualified treatment centers, so a very small network of centers who are really expert in this field, who have deep expertise in ALD, deep expertise in cell and gene therapy, and in transplant. I am very pleased to say that we have 3 centers right now that are either active or nearly activated. So that is Boston Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and the University of Minnesota. And we're expecting 2 additional QTCs, is what we call them, but qualified treatment centers on the West Coast, hopefully very soon. We have a patient support program called My Bluebird Support. You can go to mybluebirdsupport.com, and through that program, you can contact us directly to get connected with a patient navigator who can provide all sorts of information around the treatment journey. We can conduct benefits verification so that you can understand how that aligns with your own insurance benefits. And they're also available to help connect patients with other support services, because we know the journey to pursue gene therapy is not a simple one. And so we have a number of resources available through there. And then lastly, I would just point you all to the resources that we have available from an educational perspective. We've heard a lot today about the importance of newborn screening, and Bluebird's very proud to have participated and really been engaged in newborn screening for many years. We have an advocacy toolkit that is available for anyone to use. Many members of the ALD community were a part of crafting and developing that toolkit. Gene Home is a website that has information and available for people about gene therapy. And we will have a patient and caregiver brochure specifically related to Skysona, our therapy, that should be available in the first quarter of next year. And then lastly, and I'm very happy to answer any questions as we get through the panel, I just want to say thank you. I am relatively new to Bluebird in the grand scheme of things, and there are people in this room who have been a part of this for a very, very long time. All of the families and children that participate in our trials, Dr. Lund, Dr. Eichler, and so many others. And I want you all to know just how much your voice matters. It was not an easy road to get here. You saw that slide twice today. And I will tell you that at Bluebird, what we know very, very firmly is that our FDA Advisory Committee meeting, the questions that were raised about our therapy, we never would have achieved a unanimous vote if it wasn't for the personal stories and testimonies of patients and families who showed up that day to talk about what a gene therapy could mean to the community. So really, on behalf of all of us, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Sarah. We're going to have to pick up the pace.
Thank you. Got Swan next.
Yeah, Karen, if you want to.
Hold that mic close. Hold it up close. No, you can. That's fine.
Okay.
Just hold it close.
All right, so thank you for having me participate in this panel. We're pleased to be here. The next slide is our introduction to Swan Bio. For those of you who don't know us, we are passionate about bringing life-changing treatments to people with devastating neurological disorders. So we were founded over 4 years ago by 3 of us, so Florian Eichler, myself, and Rachel Salzman, and bringing together sort of a convergence of experience and passion about this area to start the company. We are headquartered in Philadelphia and also located in Boston. And the next slide. So we are advancing AAV-based gene therapies to treat neurological conditions, particularly focusing on the spinal cord. So we have a pipeline of indications, but our lead indication, of course, is what I want to talk to you about today. That's, we call it SBT101, and it's in development for the treatment of adrenomyeloneuropathy for AMN. So, so that's our major focus as a company, and we have really built around that, and it was built on Florian's pioneering work in this area to try and treat the AMN form of the disease, knowing well that Bluebird Bio was working on cerebral ALD. Next slide, please. And so just a brief one slide on what these vectors are. These are viral vectors called adeno-associated viruses that are actually well suited for targeting AMN. So for for each indication, each disease, each tissue you want to treat, you need to pick the right delivery vehicle for that. And so AAVs are really, can target the spinal cord and the dorsal root ganglia, or DRG, which are both targets for AMN. We are delivering it intrathecally, so into the cerebrospinal fluid, which optimally reaches the cell types of interest that we want to treat. And what we are delivering is a normal copy of the ABCD1 gene. So trying to provide those cells with the instructions to make ABCD1 protein. So on the next slide is just our current status. So we have done the preclinical work that shows that we, in a mouse model of AMN, we get both biochemical and functional improvements. And we've also completed safety studies. And a lot of this preclinical work was done with collaborations with people in this room here. And the data support the further investigation of it for treatment for AMN. So what is ongoing right now is underway is a natural history study of men with AMN that's intended both to learn more and to support the interventional clinical trial. And now we are pleased to say we are recruiting into gene therapy study for men with AMN. And so we welcome inquiries and want to really thank not just our collaborators, but all the patients who've already been involved. And also hearing your stories and your interest really help move us forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Mark next.
Next slide.
Oh, that's all right.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Marc Martinell. I'm co-founder and the CEO of Minorix Therapeutics, a company from the sunny Barcelona in Spain. I founded the company more than 10 years ago with ambition to develop drugs in diseases such as ALD. So it's been a long story already in this disease. Many of the people that is in the room has contributed to the stage where we are today. Patients, families, physicians, researchers, my colleagues from Minorix are there. So many thanks to everyone for that help, because without you, we wouldn't be here today. For those that are not aware of Minorix, we are working with a molecule called leriglitazone, also known as MIN-102. It's an oral treatment for ALD. We think that has the potential for both AMN and CALD. And it's a molecule that works through PPAR gamma, but I'm not going to enter into the details of that. It does many things which are important for ALD, such as inflammation, myelination, mitochondrial function, oxidative stress. So that's the reason why the molecule works. And we are conducting a couple of clinical trials in the space. Maybe some of you are familiar with those, but one is called ADVANCE. This is a study that we conducted in more than 100 patients, which is the largest trial ever in this form of the disease in Europe and in the US. We completed the double-blind phase of the study, and we are now in an open-label extension. So all patients are now on active treatment to be followed in the long run. We have a second study, in this case being conducted only in Europe. This study is called NEXUS. It's a study on pediatric patients with CALD, in this case in the very early phase of the disease, and aiming to see if we can delay the need of a transplant, even avoid. Hopefully, we will see which are the results at the end. And this is a study that the recruitment is still open. So we already completed the target recruitment, but based on the discussions with European regulators, we are moving beyond the initial target. So this is still open, and international patients have been treated in the sites in Europe. So this is a 2-year treatment at the end. But we have a 6-month interim in the study that is going to come towards the end of the year. We are now with the analysis of that study, which is an open label in this case. In both the studies, we have a lot of involvement from US. In the first one, ADVANCE, we have sites in here, in Boston, Baltimore, Stanford. And in the second study in Nexus, actually, even if we don't have sites in the US, but Eric Mag and Patty Mussolini are deeply involved in the study, leading all the MRI analysis of the study. So a lot of US involvement as well. And the second slide and last slide in my case is just to give you a couple of recent news that we shared. Maybe you already heard about that. But the first important news for us, because for a 25 FTE company as we are, so a tiny company in reality, is a very important one. So in Europe, we presented a marketing authorization last summer, which was validated, which does not mean that it will be approved. It means that it's complete and acceptable for review, and that's what the regulators are doing in Europe. And hopefully, we will see if it gets approved in there. In the case of the US, we are in the discussions with FDA to decide the path forward, most probably requiring additional activities, and we are under discussion with FDA to see what needs to be done exactly in order to be able to move forward also in here. Then the second news that we released yesterday, that's a very important milestone as well, is that we reached an agreement with a company called Neurax Farm for the commercialization in Europe. That means that even if we are a tiny, teeny company, 25 FTEs, we now have a partner, which is a very large company, or larger, not very large, it's 1,000 employees company, with all the infrastructure for distributing the drug in Europe. So meaning that if the drug is approved in Europe, now we have the capacity to make it available for all the patients across Europe. So that's very, very important. Having said that, we keep leading all the development activities, all new studies that we are going to be running, because we have the ambition to make this drug available for the entirety of the ALD community, because we think that it could work for all the phenotypes of the disease. So we are going to continue working for that. So we are looking forward to continue working with all of you, hopefully doing progress in ALD. Maybe it's not our drug at the end who makes it until the end, but at least we hope that we are going to be able to help to progress on the understanding of the disease. So many thanks.
So I'm David Moeller. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Poxel. We are a small European biotech, similar in size to Minorix, based in Lyon, France, but there's a handful of us in Boston. And what we're doing is developing 2 oral agents in parallel for primarily for AMN. And the interesting thing about both of these molecules have been previously studied for other diseases in humans, primarily focusing on liver disease and other kind of larger metabolic indications. PXL770, PXL065 have both been studied in healthy subjects as well as in a couple of hundred patients each with other diseases like liver disease and diabetes. And they work through different mechanisms. I won't go into details, but they have been shown to have effects, as I'll mention, in preclinical models. 065 has some partial overlap with liraglutazone in terms of its mechanism, but some very distinctive features as well. So let's go to the next slide. And just to mention, one of the news updates is that we've received within the past few months orphan as well as fast track designation from the FDA for both of these molecules in ALD. So this is just a snapshot of some of the data. There is a scientific rationale, scientific literature that supports each of our 2 approaches, which are distinct from each other. And then we've taken them through a battery of classical preclinical models to study their potential efficacy for ALD and AMN, and those include looking at patient cells and looking in vivo in the ABCD1 knockout mouse. And you can see from these examples that we have nice effects to reduce very long-chain fatty acids, both in patient cells as well as in the mice, and then improvements in the histology of the nervous system and in neurological function in the knockout mouse, which is very encouraging. In the next slide, I just want to highlight that also within the past 2 or 3 months, we've now published all of these data, and these are the citations for the 2 papers that relate to each of our two approaches. So if you want to look at that, feel free or send me an email. Next, on our plan going forward, I wish I could say we were already in the clinic. We've had some delays. But now we're planning to initiate these studies as soon as possible, and it's going to require a little bit of additional financing for the company. The plan would be to conduct 2 parallel studies, one with each of the 2 molecules, and these studies will be conducted both in the US and in Europe. And they're relatively short studies, as you can see, 3 months in duration with adult male patients with AMN, primarily looking at safety, pharmacokinetics, but also looking at biomarkers, including very long-chain fatty acids in the blood and others. And then following on from that, we'd be able to go directly into longer-term pivotal trials, hopefully. So that's the status report, and I thank you again for including us in the panel. Take care.
First, a big thank you to all four of you. I mean, this is a panel that would have been blank slides 10 years ago. So this is truly, we're all grateful to what you do on behalf of the ALD and AMN community. So thank you. So let me open it to questions.
So, thank you so much for taking ALD on. That's I say this from as a physician, but also as someone that has been going on the journey with families. And my question, you could expect, is what about treating patients not in Europe and not in the US after approval of the different drugs? What are the strategies in each of your companies? And if there is no one at the moment, that's okay. It depends on the stage that you guys are and where the funds are coming from and a lot of logistics and where the drug is manufactured. But what are you ambitioning, or if there is any plan for regulatory approval beyond US, Canada, and Europe, and manufacturing and cost for the rest of the world?
So maybe if I can just specify more. First, let's hear from Bluebird, because it is approved in Europe, it is approved in the U.S. There's an access issue. Let's just to break it down to a few simple things, and then we'll go to the
Sure, yeah.
order of approved, so almost approved to later approved.
No, I'm happy to answer, and I fully expected we would get this question. So for everyone who does not know, or maybe just to level set, so Skysona, our therapy for CALD, was approved in Europe in summer of 2021. Just a couple of months later, Bluebird did make an announcement that it was withdrawing marketing authorization there and really would be withdrawing from Europe to focus on the US. I think that was probably the most difficult decision that Bluebird has had to make in its history. And the reality is, as a small company, we had been in extensive negotiations with reimbursement authorities in Europe for both of our therapies that were approved there. We have another therapy that was approved in a different disease, and we could not gain reimbursement. And quite frankly, we could not afford to stay in Europe, and decided that we had to focus on the US. So we have focused completely the business on the US, and we now have 2 FDA approvals. We aim to file a 3rd gene therapy with the FDA early next year, again in a different disease. And right now our focus has to be there in order to, I think, strengthen the company and enable us to look forward. So right now, there isn't a strategy or a plan to return to Europe or to look at other parts of the US. I think we also recognize how extremely challenging that is for the ALD community in particular. As part of where we're focused, it does mean that patients can only be treated at a qualified treatment center in the United States. So those who are outside of the US, I think with their physician, I would definitely encourage to connect with my Bluebird support and work with them in order to connect appropriately with QTCs. But I think, recognizing there are real limitations, and right now we are US focused.
Okay, if Mark, we're still up. I know you're being very cautious that it's not approved. We're optimistic it'll be approved in Europe, but let me just add a little bit of color to it. I mean, we know your product, just manufacturing alone, cost of goods is outrageous. In the case of your drug, just to add, because there may be other options, and I hate to say it, but people who can afford it, if your first approval happens in Europe and a US AMN patient wants to use it, is there an option that you guys are thinking about? And I know you have to be careful about what you're endorsing or not endorsing. I go up and, I call Mark Engel and I said, I'll come visit you in Amsterdam. Can you prescribe it for me and I'll pay for it out of pharmacy out of pocket? just to try to.
Unfortunately, Europe it's a bit more complicated than that to get access to medicines, because it's usually covered by the public system, and then it means that it's not that simple, unfortunately. In our case, it's an oral treatment, so it's different from the level of complexity that a therapy such as Bluebird has. And we hope that it will be available to everyone, hopefully. Of course, this is easy to say, not that simple to do. And the reality is, as I said, we are a small company, so we are going to need partnering in order to be able to reach different areas of the world for that, because we don't have the presence in all these places. So we already have another partner, in this case in China, so that is a big country, as you know, and so even is a different story in terms of pricing and all these things compared with Europe or the US already. But we are going to need to work on other regions. The reality is that in order to extend to the regions, we need first to get approved in a reference region such as Europe or the US. And first we need that, and that is what will allow us to move beyond that point. Without that, we are split.
Knows how to deal with the European or outside U.S. system, but if there's anybody who wants to contribute, I only say that I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble of, prescribing stuff beyond their control. But it's a real problem for patients that when we see hopefully we'll see your approval in Europe, and an American calls me and says, I want to get it, I will pay out of pocket. I'm not putting it on you, but if there's any European physicians here who want to either secretly tell me or quietly tell me, this is real. I mean, when you see something, and Mark didn't brag about the data, but you have very compelling data. I mean, there was reduction in the number of men who came down with cerebral. I mean, besides the AMN, there was beautiful data there, and the U.S. is going to want to get hold of it. So I just put that out there. If you as the CEO have to be careful, and I'm not being critical, I'm very respectful, but if other physicians, because you'll be faced with it, when your patients say, help me get that drug, we may need to figure out a way that we're doing something that's totally supportive. Does somebody have an answer to that?
Just quite a new question.
A new question. And if you're right, I don't know if Karen, David, if it's too early, just because neither of you submitted anything.
Well, I wanted to thank you, Patty, for the question, because I think it's a critical question. This is a global disease in a global community. It affects many different countries and ethnic rate. Yeah. So I think we would follow in the footsteps of what Minorix is intending to do. We would intend to deliver it globally, but it's going to take partnerships. It's going to take approvals in different geographies. And in some cases, it's just a matter of citing the data from the US or Europe. That's easy. But in other cases, like China or Japan, you have to do independent trials and prove that it works in those populations. So it's not that easy in some places. But that would be our mission, to do it globally too.
Yeah. You had a question?
Oh, hi. Thank you all for being here. I had a question for Mark specifically. I listened to your episode on the Global Genes Rarecast a few months ago, and in that you mentioned Minorix's plans to also look into women with ALD. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how you'll begin investigating that, or if you could speak a little bit more to that. Thank you.
Sure. We cannot say yet that we have a specific study for that, so that our aim, at least, of course, that requires few steps to be taken first. We have not talked about what the results that we got so far, but the data that we got in our advanced study, we got nice results in some of the outcomes related with myelopathy, not the primary outcome, by the way, 6-minute walk test, but in balance, for instance, we got important results, and balance, as it was expressed largely at the PFDD meeting, is also important in women. We think that there's no reason, if the drug could work in men on the myelopathy side, there's no reason to believe that it could not work on the women. So that's the first thing. But that's only one side of the story. The other side of the story is the safety profile. And that's what we need to further characterize specifically for women, to be able to also move into trialing women. And that's part of the pending activities. And the second is also the regulatory side of the story. As you know, it's not always easy, that part, and it requires conversations and finding agreements on what needs to be done, and that's something that we are on the process. So once we have a specific, I will be able to explain.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
This is really along the same lines. If I understood correctly, Minorex and Paxil both had men in their trials, not women. And so I'm just trying to understand, do these drugs just keep away the terror of going into brain damage, or if they really help with the other symptoms that we women face? Why don't you guys have some women in those studies? Because I know from other drugs for a different condition I have, they didn't have women, and so I couldn't even get insurance to cover those for quite a while. So it's really important if it does cover the symptoms. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe one thing that I should have said at the very early beginning, besides that I'm chemist, not physician. So that's one first thing. Second is that we need to be cautious also with the clinical data. So we sometimes simplify the messages, and things are much more complex, and the uncertainty is larger than sometimes what we transmit. So that's one first thing, but that was a disclaimer. What you say is you are right, but years back when we were starting in the ALD space and we were starting to talk with the community, the fact that women should have to be classified as symptomatic and asymptomatic, as we have been hearing today, was not that. So it was more considered to be carriers, in some cases developing the disease, but not clear if the disease was the same, different, which symptoms were progressing in the same way or in different ways. So at that moment, including men and women in the same trial was very high-risk decision, because it could become very heterogeneous pool of patients altogether, which makes things very, very complicated, or studies very, very large in order to be to reach a conclusion. So for the benefit of reaching a clear conclusion, so we decided to concentrate on an homogeneous population. So that's the reason why Advanced, that is a study that is completed, but it started in 2016. The preparation was only with men.
Yeah, maybe David and Karen can also comment since they're...
No, it's a really, really important question. For us, I think there's two reasons. Okay, one is our initial trials are going to be looking for biomarker signature changes. And we know from all the data that's been published by the experts in this field that VLCFA levels are substantially higher in men than they are in women. We want to have a window where we can see an effect. That's the most important point. But for beyond that point, I think we could include women. The only concern we have, which is debatable, is that the progression of symptoms and spinal cord disease is slower in women. And if we envision that our molecules are not going to reverse disease, but are just going to attenuate the progression of disease, we want to do a trial that can be executed within 3 years or so, and not 10 years. So that's a big challenge. But I think if we see any signs of efficacy in men, we would certainly be very excited and interested to consider women as well.
Maybe Karen can comment.
So for us, we're a gene therapy company about to start a phase 1 clinical trial. So where our concern, so there's a couple of things about this. It's a one-time delivery and a one-time treatment. So it should persist. We're hoping it will persist for long periods of time. When we think about trying to structure that first clinical trial in a rare disease, we are looking for similar themes to what you've heard here. We are looking to really treat a population initially as homogeneous as we can get, in order to be able to demonstrate safety first and then efficacy. Once we're able to get that signal, then we want to look into expanding beyond that initial homogeneous population, relatively homogeneous population. So that's how our plans for development. It's always on the top of our minds.
I just wanted to add. Okay. I think the other thing, just for us to remember, is that when we're seeing women in clinic, we actually think that the disease is different. So I think we also have to remember women may need a different treatment. So I think we need to be looking at different ways. And I know Florian is, dedicated to coming up with some trials that are women specific, because some of the symptoms we're seeing, like the speech changes, we don't really see so much in men. So I think, we may need a different treatment for women.
I think I saw a question back there.
This is for the gentleman at Poxel. When you're thinking about primary endpoints for your phase 3 study, what do those look like in your mind? I was trying to envision what the indication might be, and looking at the biomarkers for very long chain fatty acids. What would the clinical?
Well, yeah, no, that's a really interesting question, and one we're struggling with a little bit, but and discussing actively with the FDA right now. So we're thinking, hopefully, we can take advantage of what Jen Keller has done, and Ali Fatimi and Mark Engelin and others looking at postural body sway. That could be a potential endpoint. I know Minorix considered that. We would prefer not to have to rely exclusively on a 6-minute walk test. There are other endpoints that could be contemplated that need better validation, like neurofilament light chain and others as well. So it's not quite sorted yet, but we're hoping that we can take advantage of the science, as it's really been progressing a lot in the last 2 or 3 years.
Thanks. I think we have a question.
Thank you. I was wondering, in context of the homogeneity that you want to see in a clinical trial of a certain population to make it easier to see a therapeutic effect, and the component, of course, of women also having ALD. What are your considerations, to the extent that you're willing to disclose, of course, to have EAP, so extended access programs for individuals that are not eligible for your trial, or compassionate use programs instead?
That's a good question with people who are. I
Well,
guess it's really Mark, since he's got the only one that's close to.
We have orphan drug designation, and a priori you have to have an access policy. So we have an access policy, but our preference, if you go to the website, you can see it, and it says basically that we prefer patients to be in a clinical trial, but if you have a physician who's willing to sponsor a patient or group of patients, we're willing to look at that and discuss it basically on an ad hoc basis.
Yes, we have some patients on that kind of a scheme in Europe, not in the US. But what we are going to do next in that space also depends on what we are going to do next in terms of the trials itself. So, and we need to define first the trial, and then how to expand our policy in that space. So.
But for right now, I mean, I don't know if this is, you don't have it approved yet, but if you had to guess the label, would you have, I mean, clearly the women won't qualify with the label. Will there be men that don't qualify that you could potentially put on an extended access?
Well, that is a bit early to say, because it depends very much on the real label and the studies, and you may get an initial label that may be restricted, but with additional studies that may be possible to extend it. So that will be our strategy, actually, because we think that the applicability should be broad. So.
Okay, other questions? And Kelly, were there any online that people were asking?
There was a request to back up so we can see the screen for the Poxel articles. And while we're doing that, there was one question for Bluebird. The question is, what is the current turnaround time for treatment initiation once the sites are up and running?
I can't speak to the treatment time as far as scheduling and actually having a transplant occur. What I can tell you is that the time from cell collection, so from apheresis, to when Bluebird is ready to ship the therapy back so that it can be infused, is between 50 and 65 days. The bulk of that time relates to release testing that is required as part of our FDA approval.
Um, okay. First, Sarah at Bluebird. I know after the sickle cell approval, there was an article talking about how Bluebird was planning to do value-based contracts with insurance companies and different organizations. Is that a similar plan for ALD, or do you have a sense of, and maybe you can't say, but what your target for payer approval is going to look like?
Sure. So maybe just one clarification would be the therapy you're referring to as a therapy that was approved for beta thalassemia. So also a blood disorder in August of this year. And in that case, we are offering what's called an outcomes-based agreement. We're not planning to do that with Skysona, and that's really because of the ultra-rare nature of the disease. That there could be some payers who will never encounter a patient who would need the therapy, and in other cases, obviously, you will. So we don't think that that's something that is necessarily of interest really on either side. I can tell you that we feel very encouraged by the conversations that we've had thus far. It's obviously very early in sort of the launch or commercial availability, and we do think that payers recognize the urgent need to treat, and we are very confident that we're going to be able to work with them for access.
Are there more questions? Otherwise, can I give? So on the again, we're thrilled to see products getting approved on the market. There's a real concern about access. I mean, a deep, deep concern. When it comes to gene therapy, there's particular challenges. When it's oral, there's other ones. If I can just ask, on the extended access approach, having done way too many clinical trials in my lifetime, believe me, I know the challenges of EAPs. But I really do think we can do something creative, because I know the challenge is you don't want people in the EAP that would be taking away from your trial. You also don't want to collect some data that could kill everything accidentally. On the other hand, there's ways that we could, I think if we collaborate, collect data in a way and be mindful of it, that we really can extend access and make the data meaningful and helpful towards extending labels and such. And just having engaged with regulators in that regard, look, I don't like to use the term regulators and flexible in the same sentence because you may throw me off of here, but there is some room here that we can do the right thing for patients. So I really do think there's avenues here, and I don't know if anyone here would be open to doing something like that, because this is a really, of all patient communities, we've got the physicians and the patients here who would be very open and able to perhaps do something differently in that regard. If any of you have thought about that.
I can comment. So, yes, you're completely right. We cannot say something different. We certainly we need to think what we can do and all these approaches. And we started with few patients, and now we are actually internally debating and thinking and talking with the different agencies to see how we can do it in a more organized way, to also be able to also use the data in a way that is for the benefit of the community at the end as well. So,
all right, well,
fully agree with you.
I mean, I'll speak on behalf of this whole crowd here. We're here to help you if we can be of help.
Thanks.
Yeah. Are there other questions that? No, this was super. Really, thank you to all four of you. It is you can't imagine how incredibly gratifying it is to see the field progress in this way. And I know this does not come easy. So I thank every single one of you, every single day, and every single minute. And we're also on this journey of access, which who knew that this is what we'd be talking about, access. But this is something that I think is near and dear to our hearts as well. And as Patty mentioned, it's also a little bit challenging when the people that are on the trial, that country then can't access it. So that's another one that hopefully we can figure out together ways to make it, that journey more accessible to everyone. So thank you, really, a great.